Are you Roberto or are you Robert?
Some people call me Roberto. I'm actually officially Robert.
I call you Roberto.
But I like Roberto. I always, when I write to you, I put Roberto.
Roberto's a nice name.
Yeah, you can swipe those two.
Hey, Mark.
I have just a couple of call-outs for you to do, where you look in that camera.
He's so slick, he has it, he's doing all this stuff and he knows exactly he's got to do. He's got to do the ending part, he's got to do the beginning part.
Here we go. Percent. And action.
Welcome to the director's chair, Francis.
Thank you, Roberto.
It's very good to see you again. Right now we're here at Inglenook, your winery in Napa Valley. And the first time I had a film conversation with you was in 1998, right outside of this store. You were sitting out there, and I was putting my young son to sleep while we spoke about film. He's 19, so that was that long ago. And it began a series of conversations we'd had over the years. Everything from filmmaking to process to future technology to life and family in general. And I finally made a deal with myself. No more hanging out with Francis unless we have 1, 2, 3, 4 cameras going, because they're so inspiring, these talks that we had together. And I know filmmakers would love to hear it. And you always were someone who influenced and inspired young filmmakers, all filmmakers, and artists in general. And here's why. The Godfather.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
The Godfather Part 2.
I know it was you, Fredo.
The Conversation.
Those tapes are dangerous.
He'd kill us if he got the chance.
Apocalypse Now.
This is the end. I love the smell of napalm in the morning.
One from the Heart. The Outsiders.
Tony.
Stop it!
Rumblefish.
If Wilcox looking for you, Rusty James.
The Cotton Club.
There's plenty of money in Harlem for everybody.
Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Dracula.
And many more. I think sometimes our early days are kind of what define us as filmmakers. I want to just talk a little bit about, how you started and how you became someone who told stories visually, because you're a man of many talents and you could have chosen many different areas to express yourself creatively. Why did you pick filmmaking?
Well, I was, as a kid, a boy scientist. I was in love with science, and particularly in the discovery and the utilization of electricity. So I would have to say that I began sort of as a technologist. But at the same time, as a little kid, I knew all the fairy tales. I knew all the Hans Christian Andersen fairy tales, all the Brothers Grimm fairy tales, and listening to, in those days, the radio program, Captain Midnight. So there were those two influences. Technology and stories takes you to the cinema. Of course, the first film I remember that just totally impressed me was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Really where Disney went into his psychedelic period, like the Three Caballeros. And also, I was blessed by having an older brother. My brother was sweet to me and kind and took me everywhere, and also took me to the movies. And he had a real taste for the films of Sir Alexander Korda, The Thief of Baghdad, that Korda made with Sabu, and Jungle Book, which then took me as a kid to seeing the Archers films. So I remember the logo of the Archers, and the arrows would go right in the center. All those beautiful technical films, The Red Shoes.
Time rushes by, love rushes by, but the red shoes dance on.
It seemed like you were always leader of the pack. I mean, and you're such a mentor and like that, where you're always supporting your other.
Only in college, though. Before, I was just the quiet, lonely kid who had just gotten to schools. My father, every year, would take me out of school, put me in another school. And as a result, I had no friends then. So I would gravitate to the theater department, because they always need kids who can work the lights and build the sets. And of course, that's where the girls were in these new schools. So I wanted to be where the girls were, and I just started hanging out there, and eventually got a partial playwriting scholarship to college.
So you already had that feeling of leadership because of the theater, and then because you have such a strong leadership quality. I was wondering where that developed.
It happened at this suburban school that happened to have a wonderful theater, Hofstra College. And during those 4 years, first time I really sort of came into my own. And my life revolved around the theater department. There's always one kid in the drama department. It's sort of like the kid in Rushmore, if you remember Rushmore. that was me. Because I had all this ability and the keys to every shop, I started doing plays which I directed with these fabulous sets and lighting and music.
When you decided you wanted to become a filmmaker, did you know that's really what you wanted to do, or did you just started dabbling in it? Or
in my last year, I was prepared to go to the Yale Drama School and try to pursue a playwriting career and maybe directing for plays. And then I noticed on the little theater was a sign saying, Sergei Eisenstein, 10 Days That Shook the World, October. I've never seen a film that was like that. I mean, it had sound even though it was silent, just from the editing. And I came out after seeing that, and I said, well, I'm going to go to film school. I went to UCLA and became a film student, and that was the decision to be a film director. My experience as a film student was much more as a loner. It wasn't as family-like as working in the theater. Theater shows you're really part of the group, and you go out afterwards and have coffee, and you're really, you know, and for a kid who was a new kid all the time, that meant a lot to me, whereas the film school was much more, everyone was on their own. You're making your film, and then you go to your little room where you have the moviola locked because there are only a few of them, and you didn't want some other student to get the moviola because then you were stuck.
when you created Zoetrope, was that sort of a way for you to have that theatrical feeling of a family, everyone working together, being able to borrow equipment and support each
Without
other?
a doubt, Zoetrope was interesting because it was a synthesis of my wonderful experience at Hofstra, and then applied it to this group of young USC students, oddly enough, because although I went to UCLA, since I had already gotten a job to direct a film and write films, that I was a little bit of a person of interest to these younger students from USC, including notably George Lucas, who became like a kid brother to me.
What's amazing is they didn't get the experience you had. You got to come up and you actually made some studio films. I mean, like
I did, and that's what attracted them to me, because they were, 3, 4 years, 5 years younger, and they could come on to Warner Brothers and sit on the set and criticize everything. So.
What's interesting is you didn't say, okay, I'll lead you that way. You say, no, you know what? I've been there, there's nothing there. We're going this way. And you went and started a whole new direction.
It was a thrill to be able to feel I was a director from a studio at 24 or whatever, I was 25. But when I came out to Hollywood and finally, as a young person, was making Finian's Rainbow in particular, and everything I wanted to do somehow wasn't permitted. I wanted to make the film on location. It was about sharecroppers in Kentucky, and I wanted to say, well, can I go to Kentucky and have the dancers dancing around the tobacco? No, we got to do it on the sets from Camelot. I used to sit there with George Lucas, who was about 19, and we would just grump about, oh, we couldn't do this, we can't do that, and we started to fantasize, well, even when this is over, let's go and just make a film driving across the country, and we'll make a truck that has all the necessary equipment, and we won't even know exactly what we're going to shoot. If we hear there's a mine disaster, we'll all go to the mine disaster and incorporate that into the movies. And we made The Rain People that way.
Right.
And then we were so mobile that we said, well, gee, we got a whole studio in a truck. We don't have to go back to LA. We could go to San Francisco and be close enough to LA to have the access to the actors and the prop houses and the resources, and yet not be in the center of it. So I essentially combined the culture of a theater club with the reality of filmmaking as we learned at USC and UCLA, and that was Zoetrope.
Let's talk about The Godfather.
Be my friend, Godfather.
Good.
Leave the gun. Take the cannoli.
What the hell is this?
That's a Sicilian message. It means Luca Brasi sleeps with the fishes.
Look how they massacred my boy. I never wanted this for you.
I didn't want to do The Godfather because when I read the book, the big part of that book, almost 2/3 of it is about something that's not in the movie, and it's sort of this very sleazy kind of a story. And it was George Lucas who said to me, Francis, you know, they're going to chain up the door of our place. We have no money. You've got to do it. And it's true. I had already 2 kids, 1 on the way, and I realized, you know, it's kind of like being a prostitute, you know, in terms of, even though you're this prostitute and you have to perform this act, which should only be done for love, you must look at the prospective client and say, well, he's got nice hair, and there's a kindness to him. You find something you can fall in love with.
Like you say, you read the book and you decided, when you looked at it again, to strip it away to what you found personally attracted to you, that story of the king and his
The
3
father
sons.
and the sons.
And focused your story and made it feel like such a personal statement in film. And then when
It became personal.
You went to bat for a lot of your early actors. Is it true that you not only gave a very eloquent speech about how Marlon Brando should play the role, and then you collapsed on the ground as if you were having a seizure, and then they said,
I didn't do an eloquent speech. At Paramount, I was used to, they said, well, who do you want to play the Godfather? And I would say, Marlon Brando. And they would say, Francis, you know, as president of Paramount Pictures, I want you to know and accept that Marlon Brando will not be in this motion picture. Okay, now, who do you want to play the Godfather? You know, when they said that to me, Marlon Brando will not appear in this motion picture, I just went, and I threw myself on the ground.
Oh, you just threw yourself on the ground?
Yeah, I said, what do you want me to do? How can I do this if everything I say you tell?
There's something on a set, every set, I call them little gremlins, things that just don't go right, things that are going to bring the whole thing down to a halt. Sometimes it's someone you picked because of their look, and then they have to give a performance and then they can't. It happens all the time, and you got to stomp them out or figure out a creative way around it. I didn't know, and Luca Brasi was that wasn't a fantastic performance by him.
I am honored and grateful that you have invited me to your daughter's wedding. On the day of your daughter's wedding.
You'd actually done 12 takes where he's trying to get the speech out to the Godfather, and he couldn't get it out, and you gave up. And then you thought of something very clever so that you understood why he was stumbling. You had shot him rehearsing the speech.
Don Corleone, I am honored and grateful that you have invited me to your home.
Usually gremlins are where reality hits what you had in your mind of what you thought it was going to be. And usually the best way to solve it is to sort of embrace it and say, well, why is the reality acting this way? And the reality could act this way in my fictitious situation.
Instead of trying to force it, let's go with it.
Well, you can't. You know the famous scene, The Godfather, where he's in the garden and he's with the little kid? Because that was cut. And I went and I started to do it anyway. And the guy, the big studio guy, says, you can't shoot this scene. I said, well, I'm shooting it. He says, well, we've got to wrap. So I literally did the take and it was cut, lunch.
Wow.
It's one of the more memorable scenes of the film, but it was out.
Wow.
And I had to sneak it.
The baptism scene with that editing, was that written in that way or was it something you discovered in the editing room?
Oh, no, it was written that way because the book had a lot of ground to cover. And I invented that sequence as a way to get what were 60 pages in the book into 12 pages.
It was a practical decision, but at what point did you realize it was also this really incredible, visceral way to show
Only when one of the editors put the organ music on it did I see what I had done.
Michael, do you believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth?
I do.
Do you believe in Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord?
I do.
Up till then, it seemed like what it was, that I was intercutting for economy and to try to build excitement. But when he laid a track on it that worked, music will help you, especially when you have some idea that's just about to coalesce.
Also just the way the film builds and builds and builds, and then that hits you.
Michael Francis Rizzi, do you renounce Satan?
I do renounce him.
That's pretty amazing.
I was sure it was just, a long, dark, boring movie. You're always trying to interpret, what does the third assistant editor think? Because they're the first ones who see it, and you sort of hint around. You say, oh, you like French Connections? Oh, yeah, it's great. I say, well, I guess after something like that, they're just going to think what we're doing is just a long, boring movie. And yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
You ask, I'll do part 2 for you, but I want to do the conversation.
Actually, what I told them is I wouldn't do it. Up to that moment, I thought, this is going to finish me.
Here we go. For sec. Here we go. For sec. And action.
You did something very clever after the success of The Godfather. They wanted you to do another Godfather. You said, I'd only do it if you give me one for me, and you did the conversation.
When the red, red robin goes bobbing along. I love you.
I wrote the conversation in those days at this time, and absolutely nobody was interested in giving me the money to do it. And it wasn't even a lot of money. So you always had this idea, well, I'll do that film and I'll make a lot of money on that film because it'll be a regular film. And then I'll take that lot of money and I'll come back and I'll make this little film.
The nominees for the Best Picture of the Year are The Conversation.
For the Best Original Screenplay, Francis Ford Coppola for The Conversation.
Du Festival Cannes 1974, The Conversation, La Conversation Secrète.
After the success of Conversation, they wanted you to do another Godfather. You started the whole number 2.
I did.
This is the business we've chosen.
It's not easy to be a son, Fredo.
Actually, what I told them is I wouldn't do it, but that I would help them with the script and I would pick the director. So a few months later, when we all had the meeting, and they said, okay, I said, all right, I think and I have some ideas about the script and I'm happy on, but they said, well, who's the director? I said, his name is Martin Scorsese. Ah, geez, they did the same thing like when I said Marlon Brando or Al Pacino.
Back on the floor you went.
So I got so PO'd that I just basically, then the big Mr. Big called me up. Francis, Charlie Bluthorn, he was a character. He was Viennese, but he had this funny accent. What I gotta do? He says, you got the formula of Coca-Cola, and you don't want to do it. What do you want? I said, Charlie, okay, 3 things. Number 1, I want $1 million. Number 2, I want Bob Evans to have nothing to do with it. He can't be there, he can't see the script, he can't comment on it, he's just not, as if he doesn't exist. And number 3, I don't want to call it one of these stupid, I want to call it The Godfather Part 2. $1 million is yours, okay, Marlon? Bob Evans will step aside, you have nothing to do with it. But we can't agree to calling it The Godfather Part 2, which was the least, I thought it was the least of my...
The easiest one, how funny.
I said, why? He says, because marketing tells us that everyone will think it's the second half of the movie that they just saw. There's never been an American movie. I said, what about Ivan the Terrible, Part 1 and 2? Oh, well, you don't know about that, that's right. So finally I said, okay, if they won't let me call it Part 2, I won't do it.
Wow.
And then ironically, when they, years later, with Part 3, so what do you want to call it? I said, I want to call it The Death of Michael Corleone. And I didn't have that oomph.
So they said it has to be Part 3. So you had 2 movies at the Oscars that year, Conversation and Godfather Part 2. And that, again, this is very interesting. You ask, I'll do Part 2 for you, but I want to do The Conversation. It's a personal film. So you make The Conversation. And then you go to do Godfather 2, and you make that a personal film too, because you go, I've always wanted to tell a story.
That's why I did it, is because I had thought previously it'd be fun to tell the story of a father and a son
at the same age. So you made a sequel that was, people regarded as even better than the first, and it did, and won all the Oscars.
Let's see who the nominees are. The best supporting actor in a role.
Robert De Niro in The Godfather Part 2.
Michael V. Gasso in The Godfather Part 2.
Lee Strasberg in The Godfather Part 2. The winner is Robert De Niro in The Godfather.
And the winner is Godfather Part 2. Francis Ford Coppola, Gray Fredrickson, and Fred West.
When you think about those days, I made The Godfather, I made The Conversation, I made The Godfather Part 2, and then I said I want to do Apocalypse Now, and everyone said no. And I had to put up my whole house, this place, everything. Apocalypse Now was a different story entirely. Well, the theme dealt with kind of what happens if you took a light bulb called morality and put too much electricity in it.
I didn't get on the goddamn... I'm an American!
Terminate the colonel's command.
Do you know who's in command here?
Horror and moral terror are your friends.
I was so scared. Not only was I on the hook for the whole cost, but interest in those days was going from 17% to 18% and became 22%. So I not only owed like $30 million or whatever it was, but it was at an interest rate that you could never pay.
So what was it that gave you relief?
The breakthrough on Apocalypse for me, I was scared stiff, as you can imagine. So with that, plus there's this big, long, complicated scene. Duval is there, and he says, I love the smell of napalm in the morning, and there's 1,000 Vietnamese prisoners. There's like 6 cameras, 1 in slow motion. The jets had to be coordinated, a lot of helicopters, and then 3 jets come.
Okay, this is Coppola. All aircraft, everyone land in the rice paddies.
We could do it twice. And when that happened, all in one take, that I knew that I didn't have to do it a second time. I figured somehow I'm over the hump. I mean, I wasn't. but in my heart, I mean, up to that moment, I thought, this is gonna finish me. Every day in the papers, they were ridiculing the movie, and they'd call it Apocalypse When and Apocalypse Never. And I mean, they were really waiting to kill that picture.
There was so much negativity. I was just wondering what your filter was, because you just
I didn't have a
going.
filter. I mean, my family, but I just was really sad. You know, I was sad and I was depressed, and in some cases, with the financial aspect, I was scared.
No one, I don't think anyone would envy what you went through on an Apocalypse Now, but there's part of a filmmaker that is really envious that they wish they could have that situation where you get to go get lost and have a film just consume you so much that you become.
Well, Amelia says something very funny, but he says, you know, in the old days, to be a director, you had to have the puttees, those kind of writers, and a writing crop. Then a little later, you had to have a beard. Then mortgage your house and put up everything you had on the picture, till finally you had to put your sanity at risk. And then you'd be a director.
Then you're,
so
you set the bar so high.
The stake for being a director kept going up and up and up and up.
Well, to other filmmakers, you seemed fearless. Like, nobody could say anything that would stop. Like, they couldn't get you to turn into a studio filmmaker. You would just keep doing what you wanted to do.
I don't think I'm capable of it.
Yeah. Was Apocalypse Now more conventional?
Well, yeah, it was a movie. John Milius had written the script. And I said, I'll make it like The Guns of Navarone, some big movie, and then we'll make all this money and make a big studio war film. So we make little art films. Then Apocalypse turned out to be this ridiculously big art film. Worse, one that had become so strange that I didn't know how to end it. It's interesting that it's a river, because that's just what it's like. You start out, and then you start following the theme and following the story, and then you realize you're making a very surreal movie. And once it picks you up and takes you, and you say, yeah, that green smoke and that red smoke, and let's have a lot of green and red smoke. And then Brando was funny when he finally came in at the end. He looked at me and he chuckled. He says, well, he says, I see you painted yourself into a corner, which was I had made the movie much more weird and much more surreal than just the big battle at the end could ever answer. So I had gone on the journey, and that's the way all my better films have been like.
Horror. One from the heart.
I really intended to do it live, but I chickened out at the last moment. I loved certain aspects of The Outsiders, but somehow it just seemed saccharine to me. It struck me as this could be black and white.
It's one of my favorite movies.
Here we go. Percent. Here we go.
And action.
What's fun about your whole filmography is that you keep taking chances. You will not, there's something about who you are that even after Apocalypse Now, and then you go from One from the Heart.
Love is a high wire ride, especially with this guy.
It's exciting enough for you.
After Apocalypse, I was so bruised by the experience that I made it One from the Heart as the panacea. I wanted to try to find a new kind of musical. My concept was to try to fuse musical but performed live. And I wanted that thrill of seeing the actors perform it and yet it'd be like Frankenheimer did, you know, camera 2, camera 3, camera 8. And see it all come together, because ultimately I'm a theater director. Action! I really intended to do it live, but I chickened out at the last moment. 3 weeks before we were ready to go, Vittorio came to me and said, Francis, if I can do 6 cameras, I can get the light to be, if I could do 1, we could go just as fast.
Just as fast, he told me that.
So I backed down, and in fact, when I go to the great graveyard, the only thing I regret is I didn't shoot One from the Heart as I had intended.
The whole purpose was to do that.
Yeah, and so I always felt like a certain tinge of failure, not to mention that the film did fail, and ultimately I owed the bank some colossal amount of money.
One from the Heart means you have to now go make some studio pictures. You make The Outsiders.
What do you want to do? Nothing legal, man. Let's get at it.
I loved certain aspects of The Outsiders. I loved Diane Lane and Matt Dillon. I loved them all. But somehow it just seemed saccharine to me. You see, the idea of The Outsiders, the concept was that those boys in The Outsiders are all reading Gone with the Wind. And they love Gone with the Wind. So I said, I'll make it a little bit like Gone with the Wind. But then it started to look too saccharine to me, and the music was schmaltzy. And I started to worry about it. And then I thought, well, what I really want to do is make an art film for kids. I was noodling through this Rumblefish book. It just struck me as this could be black and white.
Rusty James.
The character Mickey played was colorblind, and he saw everything in black and white. Even the traffic lights, he couldn't tell.
That's one of my favorite movies of yours. I'm just wondering why you're supposed to be paying back a debt, and yet you're still making very experimental films, Francis.
Here we go, let's shoot this.
It's a filmmaker's dream to be working with a crew and actors and go, I wish there was something else we could go shoot on the side. And you went right
And
into
Warner Brothers was pissed off. They didn't back it.
Well, how did you get that done? I was wondering.
They said, we want you to come and edit Outsiders. And then I said, well, you know, see if some other studio will give me the money, and Universal gave me the money.
Oh, so it was a completely different studio, but you did it like a month after.
I did it straight through.
Straight through.
We
and
never
you
left.
wrote it while you were finishing
I was
Outsiders.
writing it in the Silverfish. And I liked it much better.
You fired your visual effects crew and went and hired Roman, your son.
Oh, yeah, who didn't know how to do it. The one thing you can't learn in a weekend is working with actors.
Here we go. Percent. Here we go. Percent. And action.
Dracula.
I am Dracula.
I am here.
The story of Dracula was written at the same time that the cinema was invented. So I thought, what if they made the story of Dracula as if we were making it with the technology of turn of the century? You gotta do it all backwards. Good. All right, so the way we're really gonna do this is that the wardrobe is gonna trail the train without Dracula. The first cinema guys were magicians. When they did the special effects in those days, they did it by taking the camera and shooting something and winding it backwards, and a week later doing it again, so they would make multiple exposures.
That you throw your crew for a loop there, because I know you're into technology and you're always very forward thinking, and your visual effects crew came to you with solutions to the effects. using the latest techniques, and you fired them all and went and hired Roman, your son.
Oh, yeah, who didn't know how to do it.
And what did the studio think when you fired that effects crew that was experienced and brought on your son? Well, how did you got some kind of magical quality of convincing people of anything, because it worked.
I'll tell you how I did it. Their greatest fear would be that if I wanted to take the crew and go to Romania and make the film on location. So I even hinted that, well, you know, it could go to Romania. And the worst thing they thought is, we do not want this guy off with a big expensive crew, totally out of control. So I said, okay. I didn't really want to do that, but I kind of, it's like wrestling. I fainted in that. And I said, how about if I make it entirely in the studio? What do you mean, here in Colombia? Right here in Colombia. I make the entire movie in a soundstage, and I'll never go anywhere, and I'll do it right here.
You're right there in the Sony lot, right? That's where
there
I was
was
shooting.
Never a shot. There's one or two shots, which I shot, by the way, with an old Pathé camera on the Universal lot for Old London. That's the only sequence that is not in the studio. Everything else, even that big chase at the end where the poor goat passed, that was all in a soundstage. We would just go in circles, but what I would do is we'd flip it sometimes, so that whereas they were making right turns, then they make left turns. But it was just the same right turn flipped over on the camera.
Besides that, are there other unique things that you just came either from theater or just that you just invented like that you find really helpful?
Well, I feel, you know, Orson Welles once said that you can learn everything about how to make a movie on a weekend, but the one thing you can't learn a weekend is working with actors.
Is that one of your favorite parts? I mean, it seems like I've worked with some actors you've worked with, like Mickey Rourke. You know, they talk so fondly about how you are with them.
I always have a week or so of rehearsal when I make a film, and I like to get the actors together.
Let's get ready for rehearsal. What we'll do now, we just read it just to read it, to know what we're doing.
Not really just read the script, but more play around, do improvisations.
Let's do a little Alice in Wonderland improv where he's Alice and you're the Queen of Hearts, all right?
Play theater games, get to know each other and have everyone not be nervous. And, you know, it's nice to have a place where you don't have to be scared that you're not doing well.
I'm sorry, this isn't working. I don't know why.
Usually what happens to those things is, you know, there are like little membranes separating people from their characters or people from the other characters. And in a thing like this, they sort of start breaking so that real little moments of truth start coming out.
Good night, your friend.
And is that to build like some joint memories together? Is that why you have them all together?
Definitely, that's a big factor. You know, if you've got a couple who's supposed to have been married 30 years, imagine a real 30-year-old couple, the memories that they've built up. You know, first time they argued, first time they broke up, first time someone was cheating if they were, first time this, first time that.
So it might not even be in the script. It's stuff, let's do it so that you have a memory of it.
It's
and the
just,
character has a memory
just do it so that when you are playing a scene and all of a sudden something happens and there's just a flicker in the eye and you know one person is remembering something that...
And the improvisation.
So what you as a director are trying to do is you're trying to do whatever you can to help your actor be all around it.
Napoleon, please.
And I always have something, an element that's sensual. It's very important. Like part of it is that they have to make their lunch and there's a lot of ham and Swiss cheese and bread and they have to actually, something about food is so, we have such a direct relationship with food that it makes the whole, it endorses the rest of what the fiction that's going on, because food is not fiction.
You know, Sonny and Tom, I'd like to talk to you maybe after dinner. I could be doing a lot more for the family.
We don't discuss business at the table.
Family and food and film kind of all seem to go together for you. And it inspired me to do that. I started my own studio. I worked with my family, and I've had other filmmakers come to my set, see that I'm working with my kids. They've gone off and put their kids in their movies, and they've done fantastic work. You kind of started this little revolution of family filmmaking. How did you raise your children, like Roman, Sophia? What kind of things did you do that
I had an
turn into those kids?
agreement with my wife that if ever I'm going away for more than 2 weeks, I want to take the kids out of school and take them with us. because movies have a way of starting out. You're going to be in a place for a month, you end up here in 3 months. So Sophia was 4 in the Philippines, and Gio and Roman were little kids in Sicily, and so it was a joy to always have them with us. And the kids, love to come to the set. It's like a circus family. The crew become the uncles and the aunts, and it's another kind of a life, but it's a life that taught them a lot about movies, certainly because they were around it all the time, but also the idea of art as play. It's such a joy to make films, and what could be a better profession to dabble in the make-believe. So did you get some guy like Quentin to ask me a question?
Here we go. For sec. Here we go. For sec. And action.
So this is a section I call Questions from Other Directors. Frank Darabont, terrific filmmaker. He was at a Westwood screening of Apocalypse Now, a rough cut. It was one of the greatest experiences that he had ever had. He said in the ending moments of the movie that there was this haunting ending that he saw on Z Channel with the explosions and credits going over it, but it wasn't on the DVD or the Redux. He said how bold you were to cut that out of a movie, this incredible sequence, and end with no credits, which is a great way to end it as well. But at what point did you say, I'm taking this out? And is it because it was your own finances that you could say, this is better for the film to just take this out?
Well, the original concept was that the film in those days was like in a semi-roadshow format, which means it was a special screening. And my idea was that the film have no credits, and instead everyone gets a program, which we did.
No opening credits, no end credits?
No, there are no credits. There's only one. Even just to get the copyright, scrolled on the wall in one scene when they get to where Kurt says, it just like scrolls as Apocalypse Now. But if you look carefully, it has the...
Oh, that's all.
Because the film has to be copyrighted. Right. But when the film went out in its more popular releases where we couldn't give a program, we had to put the credits on the picture. So originally I had all of this incredible footage that when we destroyed the compound, we just blew it to hell.
So it wasn't intended to be originally the end?
Well, I didn't know maybe I could use it, but I figured we got this, we got to destroy it. We have all this gunpowder, let's just blow it up. So it was a spectacular fireworks show, we shot it. The audience all came out with the impression that they had called in the airstrike, and that was part of the plot. When I had wanted the film to end very much peaceably, where something gentle.
So it completely changed the meaning of the film.
So I realized I had made a mistake, so I withdrew the ending and I put it just the credits on black and white.
Frank, he had one other question. I feel like Cotton Club is a masterpiece that doesn't get nearly enough credit or attention. It's a magnificent film and one of my all-time favorites. I have never flagged in my devotion to this film and could go on raving about it for hours. I'm asking Francis, begging him, to push for a restored 4K Blu-ray.
What he wants, we're doing.
Oh, excellent.
It looks beautiful, and there's a whole new version of it. Cotton Club was about 20 minutes longer, and everyone's telling me, why is too many black people and too much tap dancing? I said, but it's the Cotton Club. It's about black people. It's about tap dancing. Now I've just put it back in. It's so much better. A lot of what got cut out were the authentic acts that we reconstructed. But in shortening the movie is not necessarily a way to make it play better. Sometimes when it plays long, you should lengthen it. What it means is that the audience is not as engaged as they might be, so maybe it needs a little more information to embrace the characters. And so even though it's 20 minutes longer, it appeals 20 minutes shorter. It's a tricky thing, time.
Jon Favreau, a terrific director and actor, he said, I saw a documentary a while back where you commented that someday the film industry would be like music, where anyone could make a movie in their own garage. It seems that technology has changed filmmaking in the way you predicted. Has cinema transformed to the extent you anticipated yet? What breakthroughs have offered the most possibility for cinema to evolve?
What's happened, in my mind, is that for the first time in history, we are now in a position to have live cinema. When I talk about live cinema. It's not a play with a half dozen cameras and it looks like Marty. I'm talking about real shots and montage and what you would call cinema, but it would be being performed for you.
So I think that's a fantastic idea.
Someone's going to do it.
It should be you.
I would love to be the one.
In 2003, you came down to Austin, one of the times you'd come down, and you came to my house, and we had dinner, and I said, can I cook for you? I want to cook for you. I can cook a great Italian meal. And you said, I'll be the judge of that. So I made you a pizza, and you made the appetizers, and you brought your Coppola wine that you got at the store. And we had a great time in talking. But I remember asking you, why do you come down so much and find out what I'm doing? And you said, I've always considered myself a student. I always want to be a student, that you're always learning. And I thought that was such a great philosophy. I tell that to everybody, that they should always be a student. What is it about that philosophy to explain a little bit more? Because I found it very inspiring.
It's the joy of discovery. It's like being an explorer and you're going in looking for the fountain of youth or whatever, and you don't know what you're doing, and yet it's thrilling because you have a sense that it's there.
You don't realize how much you've inspired people to go be. You changed cinema.
But as I said, it's reciprocal. I see what you've got, then I want to do that. It's funny. I listen to you, and I now that I'm getting older, people are extremely impressed to meet me and stuff. But half the time, I was in despondency of having no talent, and I was just not cutting it. So I mean, it's not like you walk through your life saying, wow, am I smart? Am I talented? Am I this? I just felt awful half the time.
But it's good to hear, and good to see that even though you felt like that, you kept going. Because there's a lot of, I think, artists, I don't think artists need to be thick-skinned. That only the thick skin should apply. Because I think there's a lot of artists who don't have the thick skins, that are afraid to even create art because they know they're going to get ravaged.
The good ones are insecure. And artists are doubly insecure because, I don't know, you always feel, oh, I never got to do that really right, or I never got, you just naturally beat yourself up. Mm-hmm. But that's part of the personality.
That's part of the personality. You should always feel like you haven't quite reached it, even though you've passed it long ago. So if anything this show can do is hopefully to inspire those who may be thin-skinned to just put themselves out there, because definitely. And if you have a failure is not bad. You learn a lot from the failure.
Failure is not bad. First of all, failure is not necessarily durable. Remember that the things that they fire you for when you're young are the same things that they give lifetime achievement awards for you when you're old. And it makes sense. It's because when you do something like that, you're stepping out of line somehow, and it rubs people the wrong way, and they say, well, that's no good. But maybe it rubs people the wrong way because it is good.
Right. In all your films, you're just so true to yourself. No matter what, you bet on your instincts and you follow your instincts. That's just very inspirational, I think, to people out there.
Well, I think
afraid to put themselves out there.
It's true for everyone. I think, I do what I do out of love and enthusiasm. And if I'm not in love with it and enthusiastic about it, then I'll change it until
you're in love with it.
Or I won't do it.
And I don't know how much it's life imitating art, but when you see you here in your surroundings, like you are the Godfather now. How much of that was you, and how much of that is just what you became?
When you give yourself totally into making a film, the film is also sort of making you. That becomes a symbiotic thing. And I realized that was partly because the osmosis goes both ways.
I was intruding on the life of this Harry Call, this professional eavesdropper. And after a while, I realized that, in a sense, I was an eavesdropper.
You sort of start to become like certain characters in the movie.
Dance with your daughter! Dance with your daughter!
Sometimes it's pretty uncanny and pretty horrible.
So everyone forget that we even shot it. It no longer does it exist.
If you make film in a way where you use everything you've got.
This film doesn't succeed, will the studio stay viable? Will it be alive? No. Everything rides on the success of this film?
Yes. If you're the kind of director that allows that to happen, which I do because I don't know any other way,
My film is not a movie. The way we made it was very much like the way the Americans were in Vietnam. We were in the jungle. There were too many of us. We had access to too much equipment or too much money, and little by little we went insane.
You have to give everything if you want to be that kind of artist.
You've gone mad.
For better or for worse, that was my instinct to go that way.
The dream of Francis Coppola was to somehow change the rules, and he did. We're very honored to have you here with us on the El Rey Network for the Director's Chair. Gracias, señor.
Muchas gracias.